Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is Bill Acevedo with Dell OMNM Tech Talk, and today we are presenting OMNM LDAP support for Microsoft Active Directory. This session will be recorded and distributed. There's no need to take notes. You will get a copy. Should be about 15 to 20 minutes in length, and will be followed up with a question and answer session. Let's get started. If you do have questions along the way, feel free to type them into the chat window and we'll review them at the end if we have time. First off, what is LDAP? What is Active Directory? Why use it? So LDAP it stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. It is used to provide access and management of distributed directory information. The information is usually organized in a hierarchical type structure, typical to a file manager type structure. Microsoft Active Directory service supports LDAP. Active Directory is Microsoft's implementation that uses LDAP, and it is used for domain-based networks. Generally, it's one domain controller has one Active Directory structure. OMNM supports LDAP protocols, so it will also support Microsoft Active Directory, among others. And with LDAP Active Directory, user authentication into OMNM comes from Active Directory. That's the reason we use it. It removes the overhead of manually adding many users to OMNM. Users, by the way, are imported as power users. Users from Active Directory are imported and created in OMNM as power users, as I mentioned. Once configured, local authentication is turned off in OMNM, and authentication with Active Directory domain credentials are used to provide access into OMNM. The first part of this is how do we configure LDAP? So first of all, in Control Panel Users and Organizations, where we normally create users, this is where we're mapping users that come in. Sorry, it's not where we're mapping them, but these are the fields. When you create a user, these are the fields that are required and thus need to map into an LDAP Active Directory. So for example, here, OMNM screen name, OMNM email name, first name, last name, and password. These are all fields that are available to set on users when you create them inside of OMNM. These need to map to the LDAP directory attributes. So what you see on the right here are the attributes that are specified in LDAP. For example, the SAM account name is the account name within LDAP. We have mail, we have given name, SN, I think that stands for surname, and then user password. These are the fields we're going to need to map so that they come in. So when we import, they will come into OMNM and be created properly. If any of these attributes are not populated or consistent with OMNM, then the Active Directory admin will need to find an alternative attribute to do this. There's many attributes in Active Directory, and they don't have to be these. These are the ones we recommend. Email is an example here. If Active Directory doesn't have email set for all users, you can use a user attribute, user principal name. And so this isn't exactly an email name, but what it is the domain name. It's got an @ in front of it and then the username. So it's in the format of an email. It'll be something like user@domain.com. And that's your Active Directory name, the way you log into the domain, the fully qualified name. You can use that in place of email if email isn't being populated. So that's the kind of an example of trying to find alternative attributes if they're not supported. OMNM screen name also can't be a two-letter value, and so if the SAM account name has values that are 2 letters, well, it's not going to work for the SAM account name. And so you'll need to find something like a display name or some other name in LDAP that will suffice for that screen name in OMNM. So the way we get to LDAP is we go to Control Panel, Portal Settings, Authentication, LDAP, and we click Add. I'll show that here in a minute. For LDAP configuration, there are 7 fields that need to be updated from the defaults. So when you click Add, you're going to create a server name and you're going to create your name of choice. There's a connection section which is strictly related to accessing the Active Directory, and it requires the URL to get to the directory. Here's some examples. There's a base DN, which is the group that you actually want to pull from. And then there's principal, which is the username, and then credentials are the password. These are the access credentials that allow you to get onto LDAP. And then the next thing we'll see here is the user section. Authentication search filter is a field that maps the login name in OMNM back to an Active Directory attribute. So when you go to the login screen, you type in the username, that's screen name as designated here, and when that request go to LDAP, it will map that into the SAM account name so that LDAP will know who to authenticate. User mapping section, there is a screen name on here, and that is for LDAP. When it comes in, it's going to take the SAM account name and map that into a screen name for OMNM. So this here is just showing that. All the other values in Active Directory are the defaults are just fine. So let me just go there and show you. Go to Control Panel. And we need to go to Portal Settings, Authentication, LDAP. This is where we click Add to add one. The first section here for default values depends on your Active Directory. There are going to be different default values, and so we just choose Microsoft Active Directory. And it's going to populate all the fields below with standard values that could be used in Microsoft Active Directory. And again, there's only 7 here that we need to worry about. There's just setting the name on the LDAP, and then we need to set the connection parameters. Those are 4 fields. And then we need to set this authentication search filter, as I mentioned, to show screen name here. This will be screen name instead of user, and then we'll remove this part. And this will be screen name. Everything else should be appropriate for importing users. Let me show you a real one. So here we have one created. And again, I have my URL populated for a real one. I have my directory structure for the Active Directory, the login name and credentials. And then here's where I map the other field to the screen name. And that should be it. Screen name here is where it maps to back to the SAM account name and Active Directory. So that's really all you need to set, should have to set. I did lay these out here in this document so that you can reference those. One important thing to note, we saw a base DN in that example, but it's really important that you understand what you're doing and how you're importing items from Active Directory. So it's important to know a little bit about how Active Directory references are made. So let's take an example here of a domain called corp.dev.loc. In Active Directory terms, that would be referred to as this string here, which is basically it's domain controller equal to corp, comma, DC equal to dev, DC equal to loc. You would have to reference this to get to that level in the Active Directory structure via LDAP. And let's assume we have 2 subcomponents, subcategories, containers, whatever you want to call them, team 1 and users 1. Team 1 has two users, dev 1 and dev 2. It's an organizational unit. It just happens to be. Users is what they call a common name. It's just a container and it has 3 users. And so there's many of these containers. These are just examples. So to reference this team 1 in this Active Directory structure, we need to reference it in this way. So you still see the postfix here, or the ending here, and then in front of it we have the OU is equal to team 1. This tells it that this is the directory that we're going to be going to grab our users. And if you wanted to, you could have an LDAP that just got 1 user. If you wanted to do that, you need to reference it in this way. Again, it's the domain at the end, followed by the group, and then followed by the individual. The individual is in a container or an item called common name, so you see that here. And then you have here's another user. This one just happens to be a CN container type. And so we reference that container this way. Instead of an OU, it's a CN equal to users. And then here's how the users are designated in there. The administrator is a CN, so it's CN administrators, CN users, and then DC Corp, and similar ones here for the guests. And QA. Let's review an example of that. So here's our example of corp.dev.loc. This is the top level Active Directory. Down here I have my team test and users as examples. And let's say, for example, we want to use team test as our group that we want to import our users from. These are our users. Simply right click. This is an easy way to get the fully qualified name, Active Directory name, that you should be able to get from your administrator or that you're going to need to provide in that base DN. So I'm going to go to Properties, and we'll go to Attribute Editor. Right away you see the distinguished name. This is our path, OU test name, DC is equal to corp, DC equal to dev, DC equal to loc. So you could have them just cut and paste that out, give it to you, and that's the group you're going to use to import. Similarly, you can dive into users. When we get into attributes, you'll see that you can take any user, right-click, go to properties, and you can go to properties there, and then go to attribute editor. Here you're provided a list of all of the properties that are available for you to import. You can map these however you like. The ones we've given you are the ones we recommend, but there are some other options here in case you need to map things a little bit differently. For now, we'll stick with the defaults. Okay, so let's go ahead and walk through an example so you can see this in how it really looks. I'm going to go back to my Active Directory that I already have set up. And so you see here, I'm going to bring up this side by side, my domain structure here. I'm going to cancel that. So here I'm getting team test, OU team test. And so again, this is my path that I have set here. OU team test, DC Corp, okay, and that all looks good. So the first thing we want to do is you want to test that. Does it work? Now we're not testing this actual base DN. There's no specific login to a base DN. We're just testing the provider URL that we can connect to this, and then we can access it with these credentials. Looks good. We got good credentials. That's the first step. So the next step is the user. This is where we're mapping OMNM attributes, for example, screen name, to an LDAP attribute, so that when we import it, we know where to put it and how to create that user. So we've set our examples per our document and what we need to do here. Everything else is defaults except for this one here, and this SAM screen account name is the SAM account name. Everything else is the defaults. And so what we need to do next is see what users. Let's test it. See what users we're actually going to get. Okay. So here you go. You know automatically by testing this what's going to come in or what's not going to come in. You're going to get an error message here at the bottom. It's going to say the above results include users which are missing the required attributes of screen name, password, email, address, first name, last name. These users will not be imported. It's very important to know this because you can either go ahead and do the import and hope the things that are in here correctly work, or you can go and fix the problem. And so these are required. OMNM requires a screen name. If you don't have one, it's a problem. OMNM requires an email address. If you don't have one, it's a problem. First name is the only other one that is really required by OMNM, but for the purposes of LDAP, where it's enforcing a few more fields such as last name, password, job title is not enforced. So you do need to have a setting in here. We see that we don't have password for a couple of these, which is why it's complaining. But if you were to do import right now, the ones that are complete will import. Okay. Let's just talk for a second about how to fix a problem here. Well, we go back to our, let's say for example, our Betty B. Barter doesn't have a password or an email or even a screen name. We just go back here. We see our employee here. We're going to go to properties. We're going to go to attribute editor, and here we can go look again at our properties. SAM account name. It looks correct. If I want to change it, I could. User name. Type in user. Actually, user password is what I'll look for here. User principal name is another one that you could have on here. We're not using that one directly, but type in user. So user password. You could set that here right now and would fix it. And the next time you test this, it would work. So it's just a matter of really simple of just doing an add and then setting your password. Talk a little bit more about the password later. But that's the kind of thing you're going to need to do if you want to figure out why things are not importing, or if you're getting partial import. That's one thing you're going to want to look at. A few more things on this screen. Groups. Groups are a concept that are not supported in OMNM. What this would do is if you had a group, a name of a group, for example, users here, if it's a group, and you do have the option here to right-click and do new group. And so, for example, you had some group created. Technically, you could import that whole group and call it group 1 or whatever. And if OMNM supported the concept of groups, it would import, but it does not right now. We use roles and organizations for users, and we do not use the concept of groups. So do not use that for now. You can ignore that. Export is just a way to export things out of OMNM into an LDAP type environment. Don't need to worry about that right now for what we're doing. Okay. Okay, so back to our screen here. Talked about groups, other settings. There's an LDAP password policy. Let me go back out of this. When you save this, there's an LDAP password policy. This is for the case where you have passwords that expire, and if OMNM tries to authenticate and the password needs to be reset, OMNM doesn't have a way to do that. So toggling this will tell it how to behave, whether it's going to authenticate or if it's going to fail. And so if you tell it to accept the policy, then you don't have a valid login and OMNM can't log in. And so the user was going to have to go into the domain, log in differently, or someone's going to have to go in and reset that password to update it, and so that it complies with the policy, the password policy of the company. Export. Again, this is to allow export. Not really important right now. There's some programmatic ways to export things. Some LDAPs allow you to export to them, some don't, but not an important feature right now. Obviously, when you save, you want to have these enabled at the top. Make sure it's enabled. Make it required. By default, once you do this, all of your users will start authenticating to Active Directory, with the exception of the default local admin user of admin. That user by default is always there. This is a catch-all safety thing, so that if you somehow require this or enable this, you still have a way to get in as administrator. If you don't want to use that local authentication, you want everything to go to LDAP, you need to make sure that at least one of the users is being imported from LDAP correctly, first of all, and then you need to go on OMNM and add them to the administrator role. That's to make sure you have at least one administrative user in the system. If you don't, you might be authenticating, but none of them will be administrators, and so they'll just have the default power user access. So just a word of caution there. Personally, I don't see a problem with leaving that local admin group as a backdoor in case LDAP goes down. You don't have access to LDAP. You can always use this user to log in, the default admin user. Okay, property file features. There's a couple of property files that can be adjusted to do some things for you. We didn't talk about the import interval on LDAP. Once you save it and enable it, the default is 30 minutes. And so if 30 minutes is too long and you want to have a smaller interval for testing or whatever, number one here is you can add this value. And I specified the file down here below that can be updated. But it's LDAP import interval 1. We'll set it to a 1-minute interval. Alternatively, you can just stop and restart the web server, and that will also force an import, assuming that you've checked these boxes down here, which is, first of all, import enable, and then import on startup enable. That means that when it starts up the web server, it'll automatically go query LDAP and bring in your users. So a couple of alternatives there to adjusting property files. And then number two, as I mentioned, there's a special admin that's able to log in with local password. Unless you do this, add this property here to a file, it's auth pipeline enabled left for check is equal to false. And you need to put it in the same file. But as I mentioned, make sure you have at least one administrative user already imported. Make sure your imports are working first before you do that. Okay, and then there's the directory to the log file. And you do still have to restart the web server to make these property files take effect. Okay. Troubleshooting imports. So we kind of walked through some steps already, but the first thing you want to do is verify the LDAP test is successful. That's this first, let me go into one here so we can reference it. That's this first section here. Make sure that this test is working. Secondly, you want to verify the list of LDAP users. As we saw, some may be imported, some may not. If none are imported, first thing I would check is the default interval. Make sure that that's you've either gone past that interval or that you've restarted the web server or that you've reset it, and make sure that it is updating. If some are imported, then again, as I mentioned, there's most likely an issue with the attribute mapping. Check the attributes that are having an issue. If you know what they are, if you want more details, you can check the attribute mapping in a log file that we have, and I've listed it here. And I've listed a couple of entries here of what you might see in the log file. For example, unable to import common name John Doe. The problem here is it's 2 words, and if we're trying to map screen name, in this example, we were trying to match screen name to the to this, and it did not accept that because, oh, I'm sorry, this is actually an email address. This is, in this case, they didn't have an email address, and so it's basically saying it's null for the email address, and you just need to go populate that email address. Case number 2 here is unable to import John Doe. This is the case where the user screen name. This is the case where we have 2 names. We're trying to map John Doe to the SAM account name, which maps to the screen name. And it's just telling us it's 2 words. You can't have a 2-word screen name. So if you want a little more detail, you can dive into that log. There is one small area with LDAP. I'm not sure if it's an OMNM problem or actually an LDAP problem, but the password field, when we go to validate the password field, obviously when we import that, we want to make sure there's a password, right? Obviously, if you import a user and there's no password, they're never going to be able to log in because Active Directory doesn't have a password for them. So this is an attempt to validate the password, and the attribute for password, I think I wrote it down here. Oh, right here. It's just called user password. That's an attribute that you can find and set. It appears that as long as the user has a password in LDAP already that has been set up, that the user will still import and they will still function properly, even though you're getting this error. But if you want to get around it, you can go in and manually set this to any value, this attribute user password to any value, and it will still work, and so it shouldn't be a problem. Just a note there that even though you get that error, maybe, I'll mention it again here, you might get that error when you're testing users, where it'll say, okay, the web results are missing some attribute screen name, and then it has password in there. And these don't have password, and this is in relation to that user password attribute. And so best way is to just check it. If you're unsure, check the user login, and if it works, then don't worry about it. If you want to go set this, you can manually set it, so you don't get that error on the test. That's basically all there is to it. Okay. Also, an important thing to note here is that you can have more than one group that you want to import from. Say you want to come from team test and users. Well, this is where we have the ability to add multiple LDAPs here. You can add, I have 2 here, but you can add one they can be on the same server, one from one group, one from another. You can even have other LDAP servers. They don't have to be just one domain. Just keep that in mind that you can do that. And also, just a note on the import, if you do make changes in OMNM to a user, if you change the username or screen name, well, LDAP will come in and it will try to, it will import a new user. It won't maintain that same user, so just be aware of that if you're using LDAP. If you want to make changes, make it through LDAP, and those changes should be propagated down to OMNM. Similar things with like email. If you change the email in OMNM and you don't change the username, it'll probably get updated from LDAP when it comes in. So just kind of be aware of that sort of behavior. Okay, I don't think I have any other questions here, so I think I'm going to wrap it up. Again, thank you for attending, and we will see you next time.